Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 208. We are now returning to the weird and wonderful world of Visual K, a genre we last sort of touched on last summer with Bloodstained Child, if they really count as Visual K. I mean, there's really just one guy that's got sort of a Visual K look to him in that band. So the last full-on Visual K thing I covered on the show was X-Japan, the innovators of the genre. Did that episode way back in like November 2 years ago. So that's worth watching if you want an introduction. Essentially, X-Japan were like a weird, thrashy, progressive power metal band that came out of the 80s in Japan, who had a really like bonkers fucking image with really crazy hair, wild outfits, all these colors everywhere. It was like hair metal on crack, but the music itself was like unquestionably metal. They used the term Visual K to describe themselves because their big slogan was psychedelic violence crime of visual shock. So it was supposed to be like a shocking visual thing, and then they play whatever kind of music they're going to play. And that essentially birthed one of the weirdest genres ever, because the only thing that really makes you Visual K is if you have like a really weird look to you. I mean, it was born out of metal initially, but even by like the early 90s, you had bands doing Visual K stuff in all sorts of genres, although there's a little bit of metal like creeping in the background of that kind of stuff. For instance, Japan's biggest sort of pop star guy, Gak, got his start in a Visual K band known as Malice Miser, who ostensibly played some kind of weird like gothic art rock type stuff. If you're into the weirder and more intellectual side of pop music, it's definitely worth checking out. Gak has this weird kind of crooning voice. They have all these odd disparate elements from all sorts of genres happening at the same time, but then you get these twin guitar bits that still kind of show off a little bit of X-Japan influence. A little bit of metal is still going on in there, even though they're playing mostly this weird kind of gothic pop stuff. So that's like one of the biggest bands of the genre that doesn't technically play metal, Malice Miser there, even though there is a little bit of metal creeping in the background. Later on, a few of Malice Miser's roadies ended up starting one of my favorite Visual K bands that definitely plays some kind of metal stuff, that being Versailles, who plays some great high-energy symphonic power metal with a whole lot of orchestration going on and like a pretty potent sort of vampire theme aesthetic type thing. But the vocals from Kamijo here are more like crooning in the Gak style than normal sort of like high-pitched power metal ball squeezer vocals, which gives them an interesting sort of edge, coupled with the very aggressive drumming and the like power metal palm muted single chord riffs. That makes for a very interesting band. And there's a whole lot going on with that band where like Kamijo ended up leaving the band there to start a solo project that was also really good. The other members formed the band called Jupiter that was really good. Then they got back together as Versailles but kept the other two bands going. So if you liked what you just heard, holy shit is there ever a fucking lot of it. Maybe I'll do an episode on it someday. I don't know if people be interested or not.
Get out of my office! Get out of my office!
But here's the thing about Visual K back during the genre's inception. These bands were all kind of screwing around with genres that were big at the time and kind of making them their own. So with X-Japan, they were adding their own take on like heavy metal. Then you got like Lunacy sort of doing their own take on synth pop and punk rock. What happened to metal in between then and now? Well, we invented like death metal and black metal. So you gotta think some Visual K bands started messing around with that. What happens when a Visual K band decides to play death metal? What you end up with is Deviloof. Anyways, that's the episode this week, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Bye. I'm just fucking with you. Of course I got more to say about them than just that. I mean, did you hear how fucking nut that was? So these wacky guys got started playing whatever the hell it is they play back in 2015. And no, their band name Deviloof isn't like a weird Christian subreddit getting mad at Satanists. Devil? Oof.
이번에 처음으로
Any complaints regarding that joke can be directed to my co-host on the Hate Bus podcast, Tommy Decay, because that's what he said when I showed this band to him, alright? That's not my fucking fault. Regarding the band's name, the vocalist said in an interview, Deviloof is a word created by us, and it means an omittance of devil's proof. We chose this as it leads to the thought of a phenomenon where there is no proof that Satan showed to Christ. I'm assuming they're talking about the 40 days in the desert thing and them going back and forth. It leads to a very mysterious feel, something beyond what is easy to understand. And this band definitely goes beyond what is easy to understand. I mean, nominally, they play death metal or deathcore or something like that, but there's a whole lot more going on than just that. I mean, the first album starts out, it sounds like, okay, these are like some Morbid Angel style riffs. Then the vocals kick in. If something as barbaric as death metal vocals could be described as a musical technique, this guy is Yngwie Malmsteen, because he's nothing short of a virtuoso when it comes to doing all these like weird different styles of voices. Really sets the band apart. This part here is funny. It's like he fucked up the middle of a vocal line and just went, damn it! Like, that was kind of cool, I don't know. So here we have two colliding guitar techniques. Tremolo picking, that would be right here, running into palm muted chugs. But then this is where the band starts to get really unique. With their incorporation of clean vocals in a very Visual K-esque mold, or even sort of like a weird Japanese folk music thing, this guy really kind of yowls. And he sort of slips in and out of these clean vocals back into death metal vocals, like certain syllables will go like, yeah, and then back into singing. Very odd stuff, and it fits the weird mash of genres the band is doing when they get into straight up beat down hardcore like this part. This shit moshes pretty goddamn hard, and then check out what the vocals do during the breakdown. The vocals break down themselves. Okay, that's fucking weird. He's just this like inhale shriek noise, and then like I can't even do it. I don't know. It's amazing. And then, you know, like nice melodic guitar solo playing that vocal melody from earlier. Very cool stuff.
Very cool.
Very cool. Very cool.
But Jub,
You might ask.
I thought you hated deathcore. Why do you like this kind of stuff? Well, the death element of this deathcore is a little bit less Cannibal Corpse and a little bit more like obscure old school death metal. I think that's why I dig it. For instance, here's an Intestine Balism song off their first album. So this is Blasphemy Resurrected off the first Intestine Balism album. It starts out with this spooky tremolo riff that has about as much in common with sinister sounding black metal as it does with like old school death metal, which is what they play. I mean, this came out in like fucking 96, 97. And it leads into this kind of like chugging part. Does that sound familiar? We're going to get back to that, don't worry. And then back into like these spooky tremolo riffs. This is definite, you know, world-class, interesting sounding, unique death metal. And then here is a Deviloof song called Natural Born Killer off of their first album. I can't prove that they were influenced by Intestine Balism, but this shit sounds pretty fucking similar. And it even leads into like a similar kind of chugging transition riff right around now. Obviously it's a little bit more deathcore, but it's still very much within that old school death metal spirit that was being shown by the homies in Intestine Balism. And then it goes into a fucked up breakdown, because of course it does. It's Deviloof. That's what they do. They're all about these staccato, nasty sounding, almost gent-ish breakdowns. Speaking of almost gent-ish, that's got to be like an 8-string guitar there, right? That fucked up palm mute where it goes like wah, wah, wah. That's good stuff. And then it leads into like thrash metal or something, man. That's cool. Okay, these guys have a lot of older school extreme metal type stuff going on, much more than would be common for like your standard deathcore band. You mix that with all of the other weird Visual K elements, all those like clean vocals that were vaguely gacked-ish, but really more of his own unique style of crooning. And speaking of gacked and all that spooky vampire shit, here's another song called Return of the Curse where they experiment with some orchestral elements. It starts out almost sounding like a summoning song with these like dancey kind of keyboards over a very like martial drum machine beat, building up to when the guitars inevitably kick in, because you know they're going to, and when they do, the keyboard takes over like the main melody of the song, and the guitars are just there for this sort of like chugging, aggressive texture, which is very different even from other Deviloof songs, and I like it when they do these kind of things. Like, I haven't heard too much deathcore that sounds like this. I haven't heard too much music that sounds like this. Maybe Christ Agony from Poland? I don't know. It's a very unique take on the genre. And then it goes full Castlevania core with these sort of melodic death metal riffs that wouldn't sound out of place on an Ill-Disposed album. But the fact that they keep that same staccato guitar style ensures that it all blends together nicely. Especially when you get to the breakdowns, which each song has many of them. But they fill in the chugs between the breakdowns with a little bit of this neoclassical flourish type stuff. And then the vocals come in, and of course they're great. Like I said, I love his clean vocals. They're very unique sounding. They're downright emotional, which is unusual for like such a brutal sounding band. And all of that is just off their first album, which is probably my favorite, mostly because it's the one I'm most familiar with. It's the one I've been listening to the longest. But their other albums are no slouch either. As they went further into their career, they started incorporating even more disparate elements, including a lot more like Japanese folk music. Sometimes that element is pretty subtle, such as when it briefly shows up in the very aggressive Torture Prison, the first song off of their second album, Oni, which starts out very Morbid Angel-y, death metal-y, weird bendy riffs, fucked up vocals as always. This is actually a lot closer to straight up death metal than like their earlier stuff, which had more core elements, although it is, a little bit more groove focused than your standard death metal band. But then it goes into this like super chaotic part. This doesn't sound like anybody else. It reminds me of a review I read of the band Enmity, where the guy says this stuff just sounds like complete chaos and improvised, but then he repeats the riff and it turns out it was all planned like that. With that wacky lead guitar, that weird tremolo guitar, and these fucked up vocals, you would think this part is just nonsense, but then it repeats itself and it turns out these actually are riffs. They're just really fucked up ones. But here's the folk music part anyways. Transitioning into a breakdown. Like, that was a pretty, short little incorporation of Japanese folk music into the overall Deviloof sonic gumbo. But then you get to other songs like Lonely Death or Yokai, and they start using a lot more of those elements in a very interesting way. Songs will start out folky, and then they'll do that kind of Return of the Curse thing, but they start incorporating this like martial industrial drum beat shit with a lot of glitch electronica stuff going on too. The chaotic and very abrasive nature of everything, coupled with like the heavy emphasis of being a very percussive sound, helps tie this in with the rest of Deviloof's oeuvre. It's basically what they would sound like if they were an electronic music group instead of a metal band. Speaking of metal bands, here we go, the metal part. Nice sort of death thrash riff. Very aggressive, very nasty. But then it goes into like these weird off-time bits. And this is actually the beginning of the incorporation of Japanese folk music theory. See, if you've ever listened to Japanese folk music, with like, the yo guy, it might sound kind of weird to you. And that's because it's not based around conventional Western time signatures. Instead, all the music is sort of based on the movement of a breath going in and out. So the music sort of has more of like an odd pulse to it than a standard time signature. And when he starts doing this kind of shit in a metal context, it leads to some very interesting stuff. See, here is like the total sort of breath in out type beat, mixed with these like very odd like Shinto shrine style vocals. But he keeps emphasizing certain phrases, like I said earlier, like he'll sort of growl just for a split second and then go back into clean vocals. And that is how you marry the Western music theory of most metal with the Japanese music theory of like their old school style folk music. And it makes some interesting stuff. This part's black metal as fuck. Shine is Japanese for die as an imperative command. And then it goes back into death metal, because of course it does. They're still a death metal band, even if they do weird stuff, man. And that's why I like them. They always keep it very death metal-y. My favorite song from them, we'll have to go back to the first album again, because like I said, that's the album I'm most familiar with. That's the one I've been listening to for the longest. This song is entitled Destination, and in some ways, it's their strangest song, and in other ways, it's almost kind of like their most catchy and pop-like. You'll see what I mean. It starts out with this recursive groove riff that transitions to the main song with weird electronic glitching noises, wherein the chugs are linked together with these odd little neoclassical flourishes. That's another big trademark for them. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And then it goes into like straight up Castlevania core, vampiric sounding melodic death metal type shit, which everybody knows I have a soft spot for. But then it goes into the clean vocals that are building towards something quite spectacular and interesting. Right at the end of this stanza, it is gonna get super fucking weird. Right here. So this like singing growl thing, and then pop punk wah-ohs like the fucking Misfits. These vocals are super strange. It's halfway between growling and singing, and they're interspersed with the wah-ohs. That's fucking cool. That's something you could play even for your weird, like, more pop music normie friends. Be like, hey, check this out. This is fucking strange. You might like it. They probably won't, but you tried. You tried to expand their horizons. That's what I'm trying to do with this. Because this is a band that, like, normally I don't listen to this kind of shit at all, like the deathcore stuff or whatever. But somebody, a co-host on another podcast I'm on, played them for me when we did an episode about Japanese metal, and I just fell in love with them. Even though it's definitely outside of my comfort zone, this shit fucking rocks.
Rock and roll, motherfucker! Woo!
Hopefully I managed to nudge you outside of your comfort zone on this delightful episode of Radio Free and Smith. Even if you hated this band, thanks for listening anyways. Love ya. See you next time.
But enough talk. How about you?
Hey, you're staring at the cutest in the world? But you know, I'm the coolest in the world. I'm Bishop, you piece of shit.